Welcome to Building My Legacy podcast. This podcast is designed for leaders and entrepreneurs who want to leave a legacy and will provide strategies that focus upon key elements for legacy creation, determining your desired impact and its benefit, increasing your legacy's reach by engaging key stakeholders, planning, prioritizing, and executing. Here's your host, Dr. Lois Sonstegard.
Hello, everybody. This is Lois Sonstegard, and today I'm here with David Davila. I met David Davila on the set of the Marshall Goldsmith documentary shooting, and it was such an incredible experience. And as I got to meet David, I said, I really want to share his knowledge and wisdom with our audience because he has some incredible experiences in China. And then also, as part of Marshall's stakeholder-centered coaching 100 people that he has specially selected to work with and to really help carry forward his work. So David, I'll let you take a moment and say hello and introduce yourself as you would like.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm really happy to be here. And I met Lois on the set, as she said, of the Marshall Goldsmith documentary. My background is as a leadership coach and facilitator, and I spent a significant amount of time in China as well. And so I think that's where most of our conversation will be focused on. But that's the majority of my work currently. I help leaders and I help businesses to navigate the waters of leadership. Thanks for having me.
You are so welcome. So, David, how did you get started in China? It's I think many people want to have really good relationships in China, but very few do it effectively. You have a rich history of work in China. So how did you get started?
Sure. Well, my family has an interesting connection with China, going back a few generations, actually. And most immediately, my uncles were kind of brought up in a Chinese community in Peru. And so all of my uncles practiced Chinese martial arts when they were younger. And I grew up in the States, and growing up around my uncles, I kind of heard about it. And this kind of led me into, as a teenager, interest in Eastern philosophy, so Buddhism, Taoism, things like that. And I also had a lot of energy, so my mom decided, hey, you know what, you should go and practice martial arts too. So I did that starting from the age of about 14, 15 years old.
Wow.
And by the time I got to university, I didn't really know what I wanted to do, actually. I didn't know what direction I wanted to follow. And luckily enough, the University of Houston, where I went to university, was offering a Chinese language course. So I thought, hey, this would be kind of interesting. Maybe it'll help me make sense of some of the things that I've read before.
Right.
So I started doing that. I really liked it. It was very challenging. In my family, we speak a couple different languages, all of them being Latin-based languages. So it was very different to anything I had learned before. And my second year of learning that, they started offering a major in Chinese culture. And I had the bug, and so I went for it. I enjoyed it, and I got a bachelor's degree in Chinese culture. So I'm a sinologist by training. I worked after graduation. I got a secondary degree. But eventually I thought to myself, I'm not really using this degree. I'm not really doing much with it. And I'm not fluent in Chinese either. Although I know some history, some culture, some of the foundations of the language. I don't feel confident in my speaking ability. So it was a good time work-wise, and since I was still in my 20s, it made sense. I quit work, got a 3-month tourist visa, bought a one-way ticket, and landed in Beijing in early 2007. And that's kind of where it all happened. I found a job. I really enjoyed myself there. I picked up those parts of the language that I was missing relatively quickly. Met my wife there, started a life there, started a business there. So I was really immersed in the culture, and that's where a lot of my experiences around China were informed.
So, David, when you started working in China, was that with a multinational company? Was it with a Chinese company? Where did you begin?
Yeah, so in my second month there, I got a job working for a British conglomerate. So their China operation was mainly focused on commercial real estate development. And so I started working as a consultant. It was in a field totally different from what I had done before. I was in sales, oil and gas sales, and then renewables before doing that. So it was something kind of new to me. But I guess the hiring manager liked what I said, and
Wow.
and so they hired me. Yeah, and I did that for a little while. I got promoted pretty quickly. I was the only foreigner that could really speak Chinese, and so that gave me a huge leg up in terms of building relationships, in terms of kind of understanding the environment. And so eventually, in that company, I was promoted to a role where I had to take charge of the learning and development of the employees, and so I was reporting directly to the China CEO. I was very young at that time and given a lot of responsibility, but it was really fun, and that's where I really learned how interesting and how valuable training and development can really be. So that's where I really got started as far as that goes. Later, I left that company, moved to Shanghai, and I started doing that full time on my own.
Got it. So, David, one of the things that I connected or resonated with me with you when we met was it's not only that coaching piece that we gained from Marshall Goldsmith, because we share that in common, but it was also that sense of my background is more Japan, it's not China focused. But what I've realized as I've done business in Japan is that where many companies fail is culture. In Asian cultures especially, it's very difficult to pull that together and understand it if you don't have knowledge of language.
Absolutely, I agree 100%. It's like what Peter Drucker said, right? Culture eats strategy for breakfast. So a lot of companies, they have this fantastic plan that looks great on paper. Maybe they have some consultant who did like a study abroad in Asia. They come back and they think they know everything. I mean, one of the things I hear most often is, in regards to China and doing businesses, people have this dream like, oh, there's 1 billion people. I can market to 1 billion. I can sell to 1 billion people. Well, you got to get them to like buy into what you're doing before they'll buy it. First of all, right. And second of all, I mean there are a lot of hurdles, right? Not only are there linguistic and cultural hurdles, but I mean just like legal and other things involved. It's not just like, oh, there's 1 billion people just waiting for your product or service. It doesn't work that way.
So, in your experience, what are some of the biggest mistakes that companies make in doing business in China? What do you want to avoid?
Yeah, probably that kind of gung-ho attitude, being a little bit too eager.
Oh.
Yeah. So back to your point about language, right? I mean, I don't think that, and this is an assumption that I had going in, which was then proven false to me. I'm not sure how it is in Japan, but you don't need to know the language to be successful there. Learning the language is a significant time investment. It helps in many ways, but there are ways to make money in China without speaking the language. That's the unfortunate truth, But well, for people like you and me who have spent a lot of time learning language and culture. But that being said, again, I mean, if you're going to spend time there, I mean, why not? We have the expectation that when people come to the U.S., they learn English. I think it should be the same. When you move to another country, you should learn the local language. You should learn the local customs. And then when you go and you have business meetings, I mean, obviously that's only going to help you, right? Whether it be just having conversation in a language that is native to them, or just in the fact that, Chinese people know how hard their language is to learn. And so by you making the effort, it goes a long way.
They respect it, don't they?
They do. So I would say people going in, they don't do enough due diligence. They don't do enough preparation. They don't spend enough time there. They just find like an agency or a consultant or somebody, and they think that, they can just kind of pass off their China business, all their due diligence to someone else. I think it's wise to spend a bit more time there before you jump in.
So when you say that companies pass off their due diligence, that means that literally they're passing the responsibility to the China entity. And then how are they then looking at fit and how they traverse that culture and what's going on in the business so they can really be effective?
Yeah, it seems like a lot of people have done that. And I know people who own companies that assist in these kind of services. A lot of trust is involved. In business in general, but I would say more so in Asia, right? Trust is a big deal. Yeah. And so, you can't just say, oh, hey, you know what? You've got, you can manufacture what I want.
Right.
Therefore, it makes sense that we do business together. Right? Or you've got a need that I can fill, so therefore we should do business together. It's not that simple.
Right.
And so if first of all, just for prudence sake, right? If you don't know the background, the history, the environment in which your partners are working, and then it's hard for you to really understand them. And
Right.
if you can't do that, then you don't know if they're a trustworthy partner. In the short term, it might be okay. In the long run, it might, you might end up shooting yourself in the foot.
So David, we tend to be in the US short-term focused. We're looking at Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4 results. Asia tends to look at things more long-term. Do you find that to be a problem in this relationship building or no?
Yeah, it can be. You used to hear horror stories. There are plenty of books on it. Just, Americans going to Asia. In my case, I read a lot of case studies with China, and I've heard a lot of horror stories around Americans going there and thinking they could, have a few meetings, knock out the business and then go back home. Right. And then it turns out that, they don't get any business before they go home, or they have to extend their stay and extend their stay and extend their stay, because they just can't quite crack the nut. And oftentimes these relationships are not built, in the boardroom.
Mm-hmm.
They're built over dinner, they're built over drinks, they're built over karaoke, in more personal settings.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really big for Chinese people, is that they get to know you as a person, because then, they'll know whether or not you're someone that they would like to do long-term business with. But if you go in with, explicitly having the mentality that let's get this done now, that doesn't really communicate a message of long-term sustainable partnerships.
Right. So part of what we've talked about is the difficulty of culture. Chinese culture is very unique. Can you talk a little bit about that in terms of doing business and understanding culture?
Sure. Well, Confucius said, if you want to change the world, in the long term, say over 1,000 years, you plant trees. If you want to change the world in the midterm, you educate the children. Right? They have these ideas, like there's an expression which is, you don't pull the sprout up, from its roots, which is this idea of when developing relationships, when developing people, you don't want to rush it. And so now this is traditional Chinese culture. Obviously, in modern society, there are some exceptions, but generally speaking, people have this mindset of you can't do things too fast, because if you do, you compromise the quality. And I feel like sometimes in the U.S. culture, we have this hustle culture, or we have this, we put a premium on it. You looked on LinkedIn, everyone's like, yeah, hustle, go. And for some things that's fine. I mean, for the kind of motivational pep talk, I think that's probably okay. But anything worth doing is worth spending some time on.
Other pitfalls that you think companies should think about if they want to avoid making some mistakes doing business in China? I'm hearing really think through culture and the long-termness of what it takes to build relationship. Really taking the time to understand people. That's being a little bit more, I think, critical in Chinese culture. What else?
Well, China is learning how to do things that it maybe missed out on over the past several decades.
Like what?
Well, it really wants to be recognized on the world stage. I mean, if you take the concept of face, for example, right? The Chinese concept of not being humiliated, right? Saving face. And then you just extend that out to China as a country. It's prevalent there as well, right? I mean, not only Xi Jinping, but the people, the national culture as a whole, they know that there are some stereotypes which exist, especially, like the tourists, they go out and, they're not always the most socially aware, and so you have things like that. But for a lot of Chinese people, they're aware of that, and they don't like that. So they would like to be recognized. They would like to be respected as a global player, as a global citizen. But due to history and education, obviously that will take some time for them to get there, and it's a big country too. But I think being aware of that they're quickly trying to catch up, and that's where that paradox comes in, is that they need to be quick, but traditionally, culturally, they're not always quick.
Yeah. So, David, given the culture and language, you've got the language, which is fabulous. Do you do coaching, executive coaching? Do you use the Marshall Goldsmith Stakeholder Center coaching? Do you do that in China, or is that more difficult there?
I do, and I do it in Chinese.
Wow.
So my original assumption,
I just want the audience to hear this. You do the coaching and you do it in Chinese, because it's difficult enough to do it in your native language to get the nuances of what somebody is saying, but it is incredibly impressive that you do this in Chinese. So go on, speak more about what you do and how you do it.
Sure. So my initial limiting belief around that, and why I was hesitant in the beginning actually, was that I felt from reading Marshall's books and learning about his methodology and then getting certified that it might be a little bit too maybe assertive or aggressive for the Chinese audience. But then I did some experiments. I started sprinkling some of it in, and then I found that it works. And so, I think at a neuroscientific level, we're all more or less the same, right? We've got the same hardware, just slightly different software. So if you can speak to that hardware piece, if you can understand a little bit about human psychology, which I think the Marshall Goldsmith methodology does well, then you can kind of bypass some of those cultural things.
Right.
Also, probably for me, because I am a foreigner, they probably give me some benefit of the doubt. Like by seeing my face, they probably think, well, I'm going to be a little bit open to his foreign ways, in order to be nice. And then maybe that makes it a little bit easier for me. I'm not sure. I haven't spoken with too many other Chinese speaking Goldsmith coaches. But I find that the methodology works.
Great. So you do a lot of executive coaching, not only with Chinese companies and executives. You do it here in the U.S., other parts of the world. Would you like to please tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So I really got my start in coaching, training, and facilitation while in China.
Okay.
And so it really kind of, that was kind of the filter, that was kind of the lens in which I viewed that thing. And a lot of people in China, they take this pretty seriously. I mean, they still have room to develop in terms of their thinking around coaching, right? I mean, even in the US, some people are still a little bit hesitant to hire a coach, right? In China, probably more so. But they're coming around where because that's where I got my start. So later, when I wanted to expand, so I kind of started very China specific at the very beginning. I was only doing it in Chinese, and then I branched out and I became kind of Asia wide. And so then I was doing more work in places like Taiwan and Japan and Korea and Philippines, Malaysia, Singapore, etc. And so then obviously I'm going back to English, except for Taiwan, but I'm going back to English mostly. And then sometimes I do group coaching, right, where we have people from all over the place. We might have some Australians, we might have some Europeans, and so then it will be in English. Mm-hmm. Then around 2016 or so, we moved the family back to the U.S. from China. We've got 2 kids, so for education reasons and being near my parents and all that, so we moved over. And I had a lot of, again, limiting beliefs, thinking, oh man, this stuff, all my best stories are based in China. Like, what am I going to tell people? What am I going to say? But again, I was proven wrong. I mean, mm-hmm. if you follow the methodology, I think a good coach can be a good coach anywhere. Yes, there are some slight nuances and cultural things here and there, but really, for me at least, I found that I've been able to really leverage a lot of those experiences in coming back to the U.S. Part of it might be similar to Japan, that we are, you and I were immersed in cultures that were very much high context.
Yes.
And so perhaps that allows you to pick up some things from the environment and then react based on those things. And so coming back, being a lower context culture, perhaps it makes it a little bit easier to navigate.
Right. I think one of the most valuable things that I learned growing up in Japan was that sense of you feel people. You have a sixth sense that's out there that's gathering data all the time, and you feel energy. You feel what is happening at an internal level. And that's something, I mean, I just treasure that, because as a consultant and as a coach, it is that sixth sense that I think makes me effective. And I think because of your Chinese experience and having immersed yourself in that culture, you've probably developed that sixth sense also. But it's such a gift that you bring back, because you have an intuition that I think many people never cultivate, because they don't have that experience that's caused them to develop it.
Yeah, absolutely. And perhaps in Japan more so than China. My experience of Japanese people is that they're very, very conscious of their surroundings and what's going on.
Growing up, it's one of the things that you're taught is always watch your peripheral vision. And so in the peripheral vision it's what you take in of the person without any direct contact. So it's that energy that's around. Why is it that you use Marshall Goldsmith's methodology, and what is it that you like about coaching?
So when we were in San Diego for the conference, on the during the filming, so I forget which day it was, but when we were with Frank and Chris.
Yes.
And so I sat down with
Coffey and Frank Wagner. Everybody, those are 2 Marshall Goldsmith coaches that have trained all of us, probably. Yeah.
Yeah. So, Frank Wagner is the guy who Marshall Goldsmith tasked to basically create a formula, create a method out from what Marshall did and does to then teach others. And so we've all benefited from that. And so I was sitting down with Frank for lunch, and I put down my fork and I said, Frank, I got to tell you something. The biggest compliment I can give you. He goes, oh, what's that? I say, this certification, your certification, is the only one that I have ever paid for out of pocket.
Oh, interesting.
So I'm certified in numerous things, but it's usually been, a client requested as part of the program, or, a partner of mine, we negotiate, or it's given to me. I've never paid my own personal money for any certification until I came across the Marshall Goldsmith coaching certification. And the reason I did that is because looking into it and then thinking it through, the ROI is just so huge. I mean, it's something that it makes so much sense once you get it, and it pays for itself. So I gave that compliment to Frank, and he was touched.
Yes.
And he asked me similar questions around, does it work in China and this and that, and yeah, it really does. And to me, what works about it, and what I like about it, when I take back with me, actually, I think at its core, because Marshall's a Buddhist, so I think there's some strong connecting pieces within there that Chinese people can relate to. So we ask people to have humility, courage, and discipline, and these are things which I've come to understand as being very important through martial arts practice,
Sure.
through living in China, and finally through being a coach. So you have to be humble enough to recognize that you're not perfect. You've got some weak areas, and to accept when people give you feedback. That takes a lot of humility, to have the courage to listen and not say, oh, hey, wait a minute, but, and, give a list of excuses, but actually really listen, and think about, okay, maybe I've made some mistakes. How can I change things, right? How can I do things differently? How can I tweak my behavior?
Right.
And then having the discipline to actually do it and follow through on your action plan. I think those are things that any human who has spent time studying anything and trying to master something will immediately understand.
Isn't that that is so true? Humility, courage, and discipline. It seems so simple, but it is also one of the most difficult things. And you're right, it is very Asian, and it probably comes from the various philosophies that are so embedded in Asian culture, which Marshall has really honed, I think, to be universal. It works with any philosophy, really. But that sense, that especially the humility, I think, is unique to what he does. But
Yeah.
you're seeing that more and more in the literature as well. Other additional thoughts that you have that you would like to share? Our time is almost over, David. It's gone so quickly. And we may come back and do some more, because I think there's...
I would love to.
Which you have great. You have such wisdom that I just would like to make sure that people get as much of your wisdom as we can possibly get. So last minute thoughts that you would like to share.
Well, I'm not sure how much wisdom I have, but I'll share as much as I'm able to. I think coaching is, for me, of all of the different leadership topics that exist, you can go on LinkedIn and browse numerous articles about, leaders need to do X, Y, and Z. I was reflecting back the other day, and up to this point, I've worked with in various capacities, whether it be training, whether it be one-on-one coaching, whether it be group coaching, about 30,000 individuals. And it went by so quickly, I didn't realize. I mean, I look back and I think 30,000, that's a lot of people. Like, that's a lot of people that I have influenced, or, who have done something with my ideas or with other people's ideas that I've mentioned,
Yes.
So I thought back, I need to be more mindful about how I'm approaching things, how I'm packaging things, because after a few more years, it could be 50,000, and then eventually 100,000, and I'm not I'm not doing like online marketing. So these are all face-to-face interactions. These are all people who I've actually met, and I've shaken their hand.
Right.
Um, so so for me in that reflection, I thought, the one thing that I've seen as being the most beneficial leadership skill set is the ability for a leader to coach others. And so not only am I coaching leaders, but I am also teaching them how to coach others.
Yeah.
And now when you're managing people, the methodology is a little bit different from what you and I use. Because they have constant interaction, there's a power distance between them. There's certain factors that make it a little bit different from how you and I would normally coach a client. But I found that coaching is really the thing. Excuse me. Coaching is really the thing that, with a few tweaks here and there, and you don't have to be a perfect coach, but you start doing things that resemble coaching more and more. You find that, within an organization, things can change for the better. I've seen it with my own eyes, and it's just really fantastic how beneficial it can be to people.
And with all of the statistics today, in terms of employee engagement, if we can improve it 5%, 10%, it makes a big difference in an organization.
Absolutely.
Yeah. David, thank you so much. Before we go, I want to make sure that everybody knows we will have information available about David and how to contact him. So please let us know if you would like additional information. We will also put it with the podcast here, so you have that available to you. David, thank you so much for your time and for sharing your experiences. It's just really wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you as well, Lois, and I'm looking forward to more of these.
Great. Thanks, everyone.
You've been listening to Building My Legacy podcast with Dr. Lois Sonstegard. To book your appointment with Dr. Sonstegard, visit www.buildtomorrow.com.